Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. As the Democratic Alliance send out messages for the President to end the national lockdown, other quarters are asking questions about the constitutionality of the process. One opinion says South Africa is a constitutional state and any law or conduct that is inconsistent with the Constitution is invalid. These are the assertions of an article by Vuyani Ngalwa that interrogates if South Africa's COVID-19 regulations pass the constitutional test. We're joined now by Ms. Khusela Diko. She's the spokesperson in the Presidency via Skype. A very good afternoon to you, Ms. Diko. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Desiree, and thank you so much for having us on the show.
Now, questions about the legitimacy of the constitutional and legislative base for the creation of the National Command Center. How's the Presidency responding to these?
Well, I think our starting point, Desiree, is to appreciate the request for clarity. I mean, South Africa is a constitutional democracy. It is founded on the basis of rule and law, and it is not run by decree. So any person who wants to question the constitutionality, the validity of any structure, we totally welcome that. The assertions, however, that the National Coronavirus Command Council is in any way unconstitutional or it operates under a veil of secrecy, those are totally unfounded. They are fundamentally flawed, and this is because the National Coronavirus Command Council, it's not a constitutional body. It is a coordinating structure of cabinet. In the same way that you would have an interministerial committee, in the same way you would have a cabinet cluster, it is designed to ensure that cabinet is able to operate in a very agile and flexible manner. You will know that by its very nature, cabinet has got very unique rules in terms of who may attend cabinet, how documents are tabled before cabinet. So this was a structure intended to ensure that flexibility. But rather than saying, Desiree, that it is a tool of exclusion, as I think some people have tried to do, we would argue that the NCC is instead an instrument of inclusion. And this is because if you were to look at the Disaster Management Act, it gives authority to the minister that is responsible for the administration of that act to declare a disaster, to consult with the relevant cabinet colleague on any directions or regulations, and in essence, arguably, you'd have a single minister, making those sort of decisions for all of us as South Africans. Now, the president felt that it was important that you broaden the structure, so all members of cabinet are members of the Command Council. The National Joint Operational and Intelligence Structure, the NOIT joints, provides technical capacity to the Command Council. So this is a structure where views are canvassed. There's very robust discussions. By the time that the Minister of COCTA or the Minister of Transport or any other minister exercises the functions that are delegated to them, you know that Cabinet has brought the entirety, of consultation, of knowledge to bear on those decisions. So we want to reassure South Africans that this is not some structure that's shrouded in a veil of secrecy, but rather a coordinating mechanism to ensure that as many people, as many views are brought into the management and the coordination of the coronavirus pandemic and the disaster we're currently facing.
Another question that's being asked is why did government choose to respond to the pandemic through the Disaster Management Act, which is meant for climate and man-made disasters, as opposed to the pandemics? Take us through the thinking behind this decision.
Well, Desiree, the Disaster Management Act is broader than issues of climate. In fact, it's very specific in its definition of a disaster to include anything that threatens, amongst others, the security, the lives of people in the Republic. It goes to the extent of detailing an outbreak of a disease as one of the conditions that would bring about a state of disaster. So indeed, it is the best placed piece of legislation that government could have utilized in this particular instance. But what it does in Section 27 of the Disaster Management Act is that it then details the sort of interventions that may be made in accordance to the Disaster Management Act. These will include amongst them the regulations, around the restriction of movements of people, of goods, like we needed to do when we needed to limit the movement of people so as to reduce the transmissibility of the coronavirus. It gives you guidance in terms of how you can control any manner of things. In fact, I think the last subsection there is so broad as to say that the minister may take any directions or regulations that are necessary to contain the spread of the disaster, and in which case then this would have been the coronavirus pandemic.
Let's go back to that explanation you were giving about how cabinet work. Let's talk about the makeup of the council. How is it different from cabinet? Also, we know that the minutes of cabinet meetings are classified. We heard this week that the minutes of the cigarette ban decision were also classified when the president has promised transparency in the COVID-19 fight process. How do we traverse these differences?
Okay, just in terms of the composition of the Command Council. So the President had announced the establishment of the council, and at that time there were 19 ministers that it was thought would be most, in terms of the functional areas, would be most impacted by the pandemic. And it was clear right from the very second meeting that there would be no area of life or government that would be spared by the coronavirus. So what then happened is the President took a decision to open up membership of the Command Council to all ministers that are in cabinet. So they compose the Command Council. They are joined in terms of technical capacity, as I indicated, by Net Joints. Net Joints is chaired by the Secretary of Defense, Dr. Gulube. He brings together the security apparatus. He brings together the Director Generals of various departments of government. And it is them who do the technical work and then are able to advise the National Command Council on issues. So they would meet no less than 2 times a week and really go through the full ambit of the management of this disaster, starting from public health containment measures, our economic relief measures, social relief measures, and really, looking at issues of reopening the economy and the regulations. Now, what the National Command Council allows, which Cabinet would not allow, firstly is in terms of, as I indicated, the support that the Net Joints is able to give to Cabinet. Cabinet is very closed in terms of its rules. It is Cabinet members only who sit in Cabinet. Yes, you would bring in ones, if you need presentations, but really the deliberations is limited to members of Cabinet and nowhere else. But in terms of speed and agility, in terms of responding to the issues as they arise, you would not be able to do that in a Cabinet sitting. A Cabinet only sits once every 2 weeks, and if it needs to process any special business, then you need to have a special meeting, but in the form of a Command Council. You're still bringing together those ministers. They still become accountable individually and collectively, accountable to Parliament, to the nation as a whole. So it hasn't taken away anything in terms of accountability. Our ministers are reporting to Parliament. The President himself has received questions from Parliament. So as long as Parliament continues to function, it is able to exercise oversight over the executive. Yes, the minutes of the Command Council would be classified because, as I indicated, it is a coordinating structure of Cabinet, and therefore its business is presented to Cabinet. Its decisions are ratified by Cabinet, and it stands to reason then that even the minutes of those particular coordinating structures are still subject to the same rules on the handling of documentation of Cabinet as Cabinet itself.
So how is the Presidency responding to the assertion that some of the regulations could be violating rights enshrined in the Constitution?
I want to say it's a no-brainer because indeed the lockdown that was implemented has limited liberties of many people. Government has made an appeal to say that we should not be visiting our families, we should not be conducting business in certain areas. And these were not decisions that were taken arbitrarily. These were decisions that were taken in the interest of ensuring that, first and foremost, we save lives in this country. The government has reacted very decisively in dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. You will know that we've been lauded by the World Health Organization and many other countries for the very swift action that we took. Now, it was action that was necessary in order for South Africa to do what is called flattening the curve, which was about ensuring that while the lockdown will not eradicate the virus, but the lockdown assists us to at least level off and ensure that the rate of the spread is slowed down. This has given time for our public health system to be able to cope should that surge or that peak that is expected happen. So over the course of the last 6 weeks or so, we've seen many provincial governments ramping up the ICU capacity. I mean, look at Charlotte Maxeke, it's going to move from 12 ICU beds to over 100 beds, and they've managed to do that over this time. KwaZulu-Natal and a number of other provinces. So that is what the lockdown was intended to do. Yes, it has limited the freedoms of people, and that's why government continues to call on South Africans to adhere to the regulations and play their part, because what we can do working together is to quicker move to level 1. The coronavirus is going to be with us for a long time in the foreseeable future. But what we must do is to ensure that we're able to coexist with it, if you like. So the message is around ensuring that, there's social distancing, you use your mask, all of the public hygiene messages. Those are important for us to then be able to lift the lockdown a lot quicker, and life, whereas it may not resort to normal, but at least as close to normal as possible, then we'll be able to attain that a lot quicker.
Let's just finally talk about the Democratic Alliance through its interim leader, John Steenhuisen, wanting the president to continue the prevention protocols while reopening the country's economy. Has the president responded?
I don't believe that we've responded to the Democratic Alliance as yet. We'd obviously need to study what Mr. Steenhuisen is proposing. But to make the point, Desiree, that the president has been consulting not only with political parties, the leaders of political parties, including Mr. Steenhuisen, but across the board and with a number of stakeholders. And I don't think that there is any disagreement. There is nobody, including government, that does not want the lockdown to be lifted. What we need to do is to ensure that we're able to do that in a manner that is as responsible as possible, in a manner that does not undo what we would have achieved over the last 5 weeks with the lockdown, because you don't want all the sacrifices that South Africans have made to be in vain. Now, if you were to arbitrarily just lift that lockdown and open the economy, then you're running a risk of taking us back to where we were. It's been very heartening and very encouraging to see even malls in rural areas, in townships, beginning to observe things like social distancing. So the message is getting to our people. South African people are playing their part in ensuring that we're able to resume economic activity as quickly as possible. Government continues to engage with the various economic sectors. And if you look at just the lockdown regulations on level 4, there was an attempt to ensure that those economic sectors that are likely to be most impacted, we lift sooner and then we gradually ease. So these are discussions that we continue to have. And I think that we would appreciate Mr. Steenhuisen's contribution, constructive contribution, in how South Africans can work together to ensure that we get the lockdown lifted sooner. But we're not going to trade, lives in this country at the just for the livelihoods. I think it's a debate that continues to rage. Which one comes first? Is it health? Is it the economy? And for a long time, government continues to believe that our overriding objective is to ensure that we keep the South African people safe, and we look at measures to ensure that we're able to impact the so we're able to mitigate the impact on our economy and steadily rebuild it working together.
Let's thank you again for your time today.
Thank you very much, Desiree.
Khusela Diko is the spokesperson in the South African presidency.